Keeping pace with the current rhythm of Beyond the Gates, Bill has started using Joey to pry information out of Lynette. While Hayley's manipulative influence over Bill is becoming harder and harder to hide. At the same time, Hayley's connection to Randy has entered an extremely dangerous zone, especially after Joey witnessed the two of them acting awkwardly in front of Bill. And Lynette has already realized they are deceiving him together. In Fairmont Crest, there are moments that do not explode on impact, yet still have the power to tear apart an entire life built on polished appearances and counterfeit confidence. For Bill, that moment may come not in a public argument, not in the law office where he is used to controlling every situation, and not in a tearful confession he once believed he could manage with reason. It comes in a brief, icy second when he accidentally sees Hayley and Randy together in a way no explanation can make innocent anymore. The worst pain is not in the image itself, but in the feeling that every piece that has been bothering him for weeks suddenly snaps into place. The offbeat shift in Hayley's eyes whenever he mentions Randy, the way she reacts too fast, too sharply, too defensively to questions that should have been harmless. Randy's presence hovering at the edges of Bill's life, sometimes faint, sometimes obvious, like a shadow that refuses to disappear. Bill is the kind of man who can forgive a mistake born of weakness, but he finds it much harder to accept being led around like a blind man. That is why his first shock would not only be the pain of a husband seeing his wife betray him, but also the humiliation of a man realizing he may have been staged, watched, and used inside the very house, marriage, and power structure he once believed he held firmly in his own hands. What makes Bill more dangerous than most other men is that he does not explode the moment he is hurt. His anger does not always show itself through shouting or fists. Very often, it retreats inward, freezes, and becomes a silence more frightening than open rebellion. If Bill truly sees Hayley and Randy with his own eyes, his first reaction may not be confrontation at all, but standing still for several long seconds. Long enough for pain to harden into survival instinct. Because in that instant, he will understand that if he lets emotion lead him, he will only become the second victim of this game. The first victim was already his trust. And Bill, by nature a man who has spent his life surrounded by bargains, double-faced people, and relationships with interests interlocked like gears, will quickly realize that an ordinary affair does not create this many layers of concealment. An affair can grow out of loneliness, desire, or an emotional slide out of control. But what is spread out before him smells of calculation. It is too sealed, too durable, too persistent. It does not look like impulse. It looks like a plan. That is where Bill's pain begins to transform into analytical thinking. He will not only ask himself when Hayley started betraying him, he will ask why. For money, for power, for security, for an escape route, or because she never entered this marriage out of love in the first place. That question is even more poisonous than the sight he has just witnessed, because it strikes directly at the final foundation Bill is still trying to preserve for his pride. The belief that no matter how complicated things became, there was once something real between him and Hayley. If Hayley turned to Randy out of weakness alone, Bill could hate her and still find a way to explain his life. But if she turned to Randy for something more dangerous, if every smile, every time she leaned into him, every wounded look she displayed before him was only a tool to keep him exactly where someone else wanted him, then what dies is no longer just the marriage. It is Bill's entire way of seeing himself. A man who once believed no one could outplay him has instead been outplayed in the most intimate, silent, and humiliating way possible. Hayley, in this possibility, should not be viewed as a cheating woman in the simplest sense. She is more dangerous than that, because she may be, at the same time, a victim of circumstance, an opportunist who knows how to exploit another person's softness, and someone who keeps convincing herself that she is doing all of this only to survive. People like Hayley do not always begin with the intention of destroying someone. Sometimes they begin with one small lie to save themselves, then get swept into the next lie, and the next, until they no longer know where the point of return even is. If Randy entered her life as a source of support, a door out of pressure, then that relationship may truly have begun in weakness. But in Fairmont Crest, where every feeling is quickly stained by ambition, weakness never remains harmless for long. It becomes a tool. And once Hayley has tasted the thrill of hiding things from Bill, steering Bill, bending Bill's perception with well-timed whispers, it becomes almost impossible for her to return to being only a wife who loves and fears. She will begin to believe she can play this game all the way to the end. That is the fatal mistake made by people who grow too accustomed to escaping suspicion with a fragile smile. Randy is a different kind of threat. If he is seen merely as a reckless man in love, that would be far too generous. A man who truly loves without calculation does not linger so long in the gray zone of another marriage. Nor does he allow himself to become the crack that could destroy the future of the woman he claims to love. Randy here feels more like someone who is both drawn to Hayley and intoxicated by the feeling of stepping into Bill's life as an act of symbolic conquest. For men like that, victory is not simply about getting the woman. Victory is about taking what belongs to someone else, especially when that someone else is Bill. If that is true, Randy is not just an opportunistic accomplice. He becomes the embodiment of a deeply personal insult. And that is why Bill would hurt more from the violation of his territory, from the knowledge that a man standing on the sidelines quietly stepped into his life, than from losing Hayley alone. But it also cannot be ruled out that Randy is only a pawn who thinks he is clever enough to play multiple sides at once. Men like Randy can seem bold in the dark, but when light is shined directly into their faces, their first instinct is usually self-preservation. So if Bill corners him, Randy may not stand there as a man willing to protect Hayley. He may be the first one to expose everything, as long as it allows him to walk out of Bill's fury with the least damage possible. And because everything is beginning to take the shape of a conspiracy, Bill will be forced to ask whether there is a third hand behind Hayley and Randy. Someone cold enough to understand Hayley's psychology, practical enough to use Randy, and perceptive enough to know exactly what kind of trap Bill would never notice until it was already around him. This is the point where the story moves beyond the territory of infidelity. Because if there is a third player, then Hayley is no longer the sole center of betrayal. She may be both perpetrator and link in a larger chain, Randy as well. In that case, Bill will face a very dangerous choice. Trust what his eyes have seen, or distrust even that, because it may have been arranged for him to see at precisely this moment. The most refined trap is not hiding the truth completely, but revealing part of it at exactly the right time so the victim believes he finally understands everything. If Bill is ruled by pain, he will go after Hayley and Randy as though they are the whole answer. But if he remains clear-headed, he will understand that a perfect betrayal always has someone behind it, clearing the path so it looks like the complete truth. That is why Bill's wisest move would not be to tear off every mask the instant he discovers the truth. Immediate confrontation would satisfy his anger, but it would also destroy the greatest power he has right now, the power of knowing while the other side still does not know that he knows. The more Bill hurts, the more he must pretend that he hurts less. The more he wants to crush everything, the longer he must remain silent. That silence is not cowardice, it is strategy. He will begin watching Hayley more closely, listening to the way she speaks, observing how she recounts her day, noticing how her pupils shift when Randy's name comes up, studying what she lets slip when she thinks she is safe. He will revisit every recent event under a different light, the way Hayley tried to influence him into suspecting one person and distancing himself from another. The moments when her anger felt wildly disproportionate, the times Randy appeared too conveniently or disappeared too cleanly, the links involving Joey, Lynette, the probing questions, the requests for money, the relationships Bill had previously dismissed as mere irritation. Once Bill moves into investigation mode instead of pain mode, the balance of power will begin to shift. But the tragedy of this story lies in the fact that Bill is not a machine. No matter how sharp his mind is, his heart is still bleeding. Every hour he continues to sit across the table from Hayley, listen to her speak, and watch her perform the role of wife will become a quiet form of torture. The more silent he remains, the more he must swallow his humiliation whole. The calmer he appears, the more he must accept that the woman sleeping beside him may be sharing the darkest secrets of his life with someone else. That pain will change Bill. It will make his choices colder, sharper, and less forgiving. It will push him not only to learn the truth, but to arrange that truth in such a way that when it finally explodes, everyone involved is left with no way out. Bill is not the kind of man who simply wants an apology. Once his pride has been pierced, he will begin to crave a version of justice that looks very much like reckoning. As for Hayley, once Bill pushes her into a corner, she will face the greatest test of her life. Confession is the only path that still contains a shred of humanity, but it is also the path that demands she accept losing everything: money, status, protection, identity, and perhaps even the last fragments of mercy Bill still has left. Continuing to lie is the more natural response, because people who have grown used to surviving through disguise rarely know how to stop at the right moment. They only know how to dig the maze deeper, helping the other person will become exhausted before reaching the center. Hayley may blame loneliness, claim Bill never truly understood her, point to the pressure from his family, the contempt she has endured, a moment of weakness, Randy's persistence. Anything except herself. But the problem is that Bill will no longer hear her words the way he once did. Once the image of Hayley beside Randy is fixed in his mind, every explanation she offers will have to pass through the filter of confirmed betrayal. The more she talks, the more likely she is to expose herself. The more she cries, the greater the chance that Bill will decide tears are just another one of her skills. Randy is different. If Bill locks the door and forces him to face the truth, that moment will reveal Randy's real nature more clearly than anything else. A man bold enough to slip into another man's life in darkness is not always brave enough to stand beneath the gaze of the one he betrayed. Randy may try to act tough, but the moment Bill presents a few details more precise than he expects, the shell will crack. And in the battle between loyalty to Hayley and saving himself, the odds are high that Randy will choose himself. That is when Bill will learn whether this was ever love at all. Real love can be reckless, but it rarely sells the other person out in the very moment of greatest danger. If Randy spills everything to save his own skin, Bill will understand that Hayley did not just betray him. She also gambled her life on a man who was never strong enough to carry the consequences of his own choices. In the end, the most compelling part of this possibility is not whether Bill will hurt, but what he will do with that pain. If he confronts them immediately, the scene will be explosive, but it will only be a fire that flares up and burns out. If he quietly investigates, gathering each piece of evidence while letting Hayley and Randy continue believing they still control the situation, then the retaliation will run far deeper. It will not simply tear off masks. It will strip bare the entire false structure that has kept them alive all this time. And that is the direction that fits Bill best, not acting like a husband who has just been betrayed, but like a man who has been insulted at the deepest level and is now calmly preparing the moment when he can turn his humiliation into a sentence for everyone who ever mistook him for prey. In the world of Fairmont Crest, the truth does not save anyone. But in the right hands, it can become a weapon. And if Bill truly has seen Hayley and Randy together, then that is not just the day his marriage begins to crack. It may be the day Bill stops being the one who was deceived and becomes the only person in the room calm enough, ruthless enough, and patient enough to make every traitor pay with the very thing they thought they had hidden best. Thank you all for taking the time to watch my video, and thank you for your trust. Everything I create is only speculation and personal opinion. If you found this video good and helpful, please support me with a like and leave a comment. If you have better ideas or more interesting theories, share them in the comments so everyone can discuss together. I truly appreciate every contribution and all of your support. Thank you so much. And if you have not followed us yet, please scroll down and hit the subscribe button.